Welcome back to Today in Atlanta Sports. It is March 1st, which feels weird to say, to be honest, but we have some huge news revolving around the MLB lockout, which has been going on for now 3 months. Last night was the deadline, February 28th. If we don't get it done, we're going to be canceling games. But we had enough progress made going into the wee hours of the night. I mean, 1, 2 in the morning, they were meeting. They met for 14 total hours. Enough progress was made to push that deadline to 5 o'clock. And the belief is, I don't want to say this because I'm optimistic, but like with these two sides, you never know who's going to throw a temper tantrum next. But the belief is we will have a resolution by 5 o'clock, an agreed upon, verbal agreement. Then it'll be signed. Then it'll be ratified. And the next couple of days, free agency, baseball could indeed be back. And I don't know. That feels so good to say. It's not even funny. I've been dying over here. Obviously, the Braves are my team. That's what I cover. That's what I've been covering for the last 5 years, pretty much of my life. And when this happens, it just, I'm bored out of my mind. I'm dying over here. I've been waiting for anything, licking my chops for any rumor that I can find. There's been nothing for 3 months, but that could all be coming to an end starting at 5 o'clock today or before then.
Yeah, you tweeted out that SpongeBob meme of depressed, and I thought that was so funny because it really has been. And, it's at the cost of the fans, which is horrible, that the fans are the ones who suffer the most. I mean, sure, players aren't getting paid and all this stuff, but, in hindsight, it'll be fine for them. But for fans, this has been horrible, especially for people like us who are completely dependent on Braves news. That this is the best outcome. I hope to God that it's solved by 5 p.m. I might even get drunk tonight in celebration if it happens. I can't believe I would say I miss baseball this much, but I've been missing it.
Well, yeah, and I think the thing about baseball that is so awesome is there isn't really an off season. The season itself is really long. Then you have the playoffs. But one of the biggest things in baseball, especially as far as coverage go, is the whole hot stove. It's all the rumors. Like among all the sports, and I guess the NBA free agency kind of does it, but it's such a short period. Like the hot stove, the rumors, all that juicy stuff that comes out over the 3 months of the offseason is almost as exciting as the season itself. You see a ton of moves, a ton of action, and we've just been deprived of that. Now, when the lockout does end, it's going to be pandemonium. I mean, we're talking, I'm expecting huge deals within 48 hours of the ratification. I don't know if we'll find out deals before then, because I know it has to be ratified, which I think can take a day or two. So I don't know if it's going to be like, all right, there's a deal and agreement and we'll start hearing rumors about deals, or if it's going to be, a day before, free agency opens and then it's just, a shit show. Either way, though, over the next week, if we do get a deal done, it's going to be absolute pandemonium in the baseball world. I think we could see trades. We're going to see Carlos Correa sign. I think we'll see Freeman sign within 48 hours. So it's going to be, for Braves fans who literally we didn't do anything before the lockout. So we're one of the few teams that, obviously we're in a position to win a World Series this next season, coming off a World Series. We didn't really make any moves. So we have, I think, 6 or 7 of our own free agents out there, including Freddie Freeman, our best player. So it's time to lock and load. It's time to lock and load if you're a Braves fan. I know you've probably been tuning it out. I don't blame you for tuning it out, because if I wasn't writing about the sport, I wouldn't give a shit until they tell me, okay, the lockout's over. But now it's time to lock and load, guys. I'm telling you, I believe in my heart that by the time, this video will probably be released around noon. Within 5 hours of this video, we will have a deal and agreement, which it almost just feels, if you had known where we were 48 hours ago, it feels surreal. Like it just doesn't feel real. But I always knew that if these guys went there, put their heads together for 12 hours, this deal would get done. It's sad that it took 3 months for them to just do it one time, but we're here. And I believe in the next 12 hours, we are going to have baseball back.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about the mad dash once it does end. And that brings up, I was thinking, this will be a completely different offseason than, every offseason before, because, teams aren't having that window where they're able to, kind of feel free agents out, feel other teams out, feel other general managers out, and, put kind of lines in the water, different lines in the water. Whereas now, just like you said, it's going to be pandemonium. That mad dash to get free agents, to get these trades done. It's going to be an interesting offseason that, doesn't really happen that often. So there might be different strategies. I hadn't really thought about this till now, but the big winners that usually dominate free agency might not this year, or they might dominate it even more. So I'm curious to see how that'll all play out.
Yeah, I really have no idea what to expect. Obviously, this has never happened. I mean, since I've been covering the team for the last 6 years, so nothing like this has happened. So yeah, I have no idea what to expect. I don't know if we're gonna have backdoor deals just come out, right. So like they've already been talked about. I don't know if we're gonna have a guy, like Freddie Freeman. Everyone says he's gonna go quickly, but I don't know if we're gonna have a guy like Carlos Correa. Maybe take 2 or 3 weeks. Is it gonna take 2 or 3 weeks? Is it gonna happen right away? Because I'm looking at games canceled in spring training. I think it's up to March 8th. The games have been canceled. So you think that second week of March, we could have spring training going on in about 2 weeks from now. And then I imagine they're going to push back the season for like at least 2 weeks. So it'll probably be mid-April start instead of, a late March start. But still, I mean, yeah, everything. I have no idea. I really don't. I think things are going to move really quickly. I think we could see Freddie Freeman be the first big name off the board. But I don't know. As far as like the Carlos Correa situation goes, it didn't really seem like that even got a lot of like traction before the lockout. So, and he's the biggest name on the market. So it's going to be weird. And another thing is trades. Now you only have 2-3 weeks to facilitate these big trades that you could have talk about months. Have they been talking about these behind closed doors? Can they actually come to fruition, or is there not enough time for a big trade? So there's a lot of things that I'm just ready for it to happen. I'm just ready for everything. So it's all unknown to me. It's unknown to most people, I would say. And I think it's going to be unbelievably fun. As much as it sucked to not have 3 months, this might be the most action-packed month of baseball we've ever had in our lives.
Yeah. Moving on to the Falcons, Steve Weish. He works for NFL Network. He's a Falcons. He covered the Falcons years ago for maybe over close to a decade. So he's got ties in the Falcons organization. He dropped a bunch of bombs on NFL Network on Monday afternoon, stating basically all of Terry Fontenot's. I mean, this seems a little crazy that he basically knows exactly. He's reporting that he knows Grady Jarrett's going to get extended. Calvin Ridley's likely to get traded. Jake Matthews is likely to get extended. And then, at the very last option would be to adjust Matt Ryan's contract, whether that be an extension or restructure. Weiss did clarify that would be a last resort option for the Falcons. But it's kind of wild that he already has his clause into all of this going on in the offseason about Grady Jarrett's for sure. He made it seem like Grady Jarrett is for sure getting extended, which was, brought up this offseason about him possibly getting traded. And, those come from unreliable sources. It wasn't corroborated. So, however much you put into those rumors, that's your prerogative. But he also said, it is likely that Calvin Ridley is going to get traded. He said, basically it's for two different reasons. Both sides might want a clean break, and it saves the team over $11 million. And this is, he reported that all of this, the goal of all of this was to become mid-market shoppers in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought the Grady Jarrett rumors were more just other teams hopeful that he becomes available. That'd be nice if one of the best defensive tackles became available for trade. I always thought there was no way the Falcons would let that happen. One, they can save more money by extending him. Two, he's the only defensive piece worth a damn outside of AJ Terrell. So it always, to me, I thought the Grady Jarrett extension was a no-brainer. And I think that's definitely going to be the case. Jake Matthews makes a lot of sense. I mean, you see a guy like Andrew Whitworth still dominating at 40 years old. That's not normal, but Matthews only 29. He started pretty much every game. He started every game except for one in his career. Best piece on the offensive line. Makes a lot of sense to extend him. Ridley likely getting traded. That's something Weiss has been reporting for a while. So I don't think anything's really changed on that front. But I've always said, I think it's likely. I've agreed with them on that. The one kind of point that we were both arguing, and our guy, Matt Carrolley, from Talkin' Birdie was arguing with him about, was the not touching Matt Ryan's contract. And I know Weiss is plugged in. But I'm going to kind of sign with Carolee here, not just because I work with him. Carolee annoys me as much as he annoys everyone else on Twitter. So like, it's not like I'm just like, oh, he does some stuff for the site. He has a podcast with my boys that I'm agreeing with him. I just think, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Falcons to completely untouch Ryan's contract. I understand not wanting to kick the can maybe completely down the road. But to create, they can create 18 mil. I would be shocked if that remained completely untouched, just given where they are and given what else we've heard about the Falcons and their relationship with Matt Ryan. They supposedly really like him. They liked what they saw out of him last year. So I see his contract. It's almost has to be touched. If you really want to become a mid-market team in free agency, it has to be touched a little bit. So to say it's going to remain untouched, I agree. Maybe it's the last thing they want to touch, but I think it almost has to be.
Yeah, he's going to count for 48 million. His cap hit is 48 million, and that's because Thomas Dimitroff and company kept restructuring his contract, and now it's kind of time to pay the piper. But they could restructure him again and save a bunch of money. But in the effects of that, it would be harder to move off Matt Ryan next year. So you can do a max restructure and save a ton of money, or you can do a simple restructure. There's definitely different levels. You don't have to restructure all of it. You can restructure some of it. And I tend to agree with you that, Weish is plugged in. It's kind of hard to argue with that. But this is just from the outside perspective that I think competing with a quarterback who isn't Patrick Mahomes making $50 million a year is near impossible in this league. If you expect to compete in 2022, paying Matt Ryan, who's, right outside of the top 10 quarterbacks, $50 million taking up 25% of your 2022 salary cap is, it's not ideal. And what makes sense to me is, this is kind of an evaluation year, I guess. And if Matt Ryan performs, they would likely extend him next offseason. But even still, if you're going to commit to, Grady Jarrett and Jake Matthews, I don't think Jake Matthews or Matt Ryan's play production was any worse than Jake Matthews. And yeah, Matt Ryan's, 5-6 years older than Jake Matthews, but they play wildly different positions. If you're thinking about extending Jake Matthews, who's turning 30, he'll be 30 by the time of 2022, the start of 2022, that I think, it seems inevitable that they're going to touch his contract, whether it's a simple restructure or a max restructure. I don't see them. You can't say to the public, we're behind Matt Ryan, all this stuff. We believe in him. He's our guy. No trades, blah, 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 blah. And then, keep it up in the air. It's kind of like, you prove it this year, Matt Ryan, and then we'll extend you. They're saying one thing, but their actions are saying another thing. So it is quite befuddling that Weish is really saying that they do not want to touch his contract, which does make sense because, I understand if you want to move off of him next year, you don't touch his contract or you restructure as, only the necessary amount. And he did say, that it is a last resort. I just think they're going to touch it even a little bit. But what's going to be hilarious is if they do, Carolee is going to have his day on Twitter. He's going to have his day on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm going to love it. And I think that day is coming because you look at the messages the team is sending. They want to win now. If you want to win now, you have to touch that contract. Like there's literally zero doubts about it. If you are trying to win now, you have to touch that contract. So, and I think they are in some ways trying to win now. I mean, as Carolee said, if they go, 4-12 this year or 4-13, with the 17 game schedule or something like that, they're going to be on the hot seat in year 3. I don't think there's any doubt about it, especially the way they went about it from the beginning. So they're in just a little bit of a pickle. And that's why, like I've said a million times on this show, and like you said on the podcast before, that this is just such an interesting offseason for the Falcons because there are so many moving parts. But I think for the most part, all of the things Weish said made sense. I agree with Jarrett getting extended. I understand Matthews being an extension candidate, even if it's only, a 2 or 3 year extension, something like that. One thing he didn't touch on, though, I thought was interesting was Deion Jones. You would think he's definitely a trade candidate if you can find someone to take on that contract, which I know he didn't play well last year, but I feel like you could find someone that would, throw you a sixth rounder or a fifth round, something like that. Like you're not going to get, a second rounder like some people on Twitter still think Deion Jones is worth. But, if you want to clear some cap space, dealing a sixth rounder or something like that could easily be worth it, especially if you're trying to bring Foy Oluokun back and you trust Michael Walker. So, that's another piece he didn't even touch on. Ridley obviously clears 11 million in cap space. That makes too much sense, especially if he's not really doesn't want to play for the Falcons. But that Matt Ryan thing is going to be the things to watch out for. And I don't know how they don't touch it a little bit, even if it is the last resort.
Yeah, they could have extended Grady Jarrett last year. What were you waiting in 2021 to see if Grady Jarrett still had it? Like they could have extended him last year and created, a similar amount of space as if they restructured Matt Ryan's deal. And then now they want to extend Grady Jarrett. It doesn't make sense either, we're too small to understand the big picture, which is probably likely, or this regime has no idea what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah, I mean that's why I say they're in a pickle. I think they got themselves in the pickle by not moving off Matt Ryan last year and kicking the can further down the road. And I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know if they thought they were going to be better than they were last year. But yeah, for some reason they decided to compete, and I was saying, no, just hit the rebuild button. Just hit the rebuild. See, I wouldn't even mind, and I've said it a million times. I wouldn't even mind if they, said it. You know what? We fucked up. We should have hit the rebuild button last year. Let's hit it this year. But it's just like they're still in this weird thing where it's like, do we want to compete or do we want to, compete and rebuild at the same time? Which you can't do. You can't do that in the NFL. You can't be there's no retooling in the NFL. Like in baseball, you'll see small market teams like the Rays and the Athletics kind of retool where they'll take like a gap year, they'll sell one of their best players, replenish their farm system, and they'll be good 2 years later. That's not how the NFL works. It's like a cycle. It's cyclical in the NFL. You got 4 good years.
I think I disagree, except for the fact that if you have a quarterback accounting for this much of your cap, it's definitely not possible. But if you're just you got a Mike Glennon in there every single year, you can still try and compete. Mike Glennon is not going to give you shit, but one of these Teddy Bridgewater-esque quarterbacks who's going to cost you $15 million, you can try and build around that.
But that's the worst.
Get to a point where obviously you're not going to compete. But what you're saying is the Falcons in particular with Matt Ryan's contract cannot do that. They can't try and rebuild and also try and compete when a guy is costing 25% of all of your cap. I mean, that's impossible.
Yeah, no. So it's going to be interesting. We should, I think, in the next couple of weeks, start getting some answers on a lot of these questions. Hopefully we get a Grady Jarrett extension. I'm definitely hopeful on that. Maybe we get a Matthews extension. Maybe we get a touch up on Matt Ryan's contract and we get an outburst from Carolee. That's must watch Twitter. One last thing we talk about before we wrap up this episode is the Hawks on the road tonight against the Celtics in what is kind of looking like a must-win. 22 games left, I believe, on the season. 1-1 since the All-Star break. Big win over Toronto the other day. That was a very big win. Things could have started to look a lot bleaker with a loss against the Raptors. Big win over the Raptors. If they can get one on the road against the Celtics, it's on TNT, 3-0 in TNT games this year. It would be a huge step. Yeah, it would be a huge step in the right direction if they could get one on the road against the Celtics, who are currently that 6th seed. And I think they're 5 games ahead of the Hawks, 5 or 5.5.
I think they're 5.5, yeah.
But if you make that 4.5, that looks doable. Now, if it gets to 6.5, you can pretty much top 6 seed. You can almost throw that out of the window. So this is about as close to a must-win of an NBA game with 20 games left in the season that there is, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. It is funny that Trey had a pretty rough night first game back. He couldn't hit any of his shots from anywhere, and then he comes back and just dropped 41 on the Raptors.
41 and 11. 41 and 11. Yeah, I mean, people – and I'm not going to name – there's a lot of stupid people on Twitter, but seeing people like Kirshner from The Athletic kind of pile on Trey for a bad performance, you wonder if there's still some salt left over from when Trey dogged him on Twitter. Because I thought that was pretty lame, if you're going to be honest. Like, you're talking about a guy who's clearly carried this team all season through injuries, through COVID.
He's a superstar.
Yeah,
dude.
I mean,
he's a superstar. What are you talking about?
if the Hawks team around him had been playing better, I mean, we're talking about an MVP candidate, and you kind of dogged him for one bad game coming off the All-Star break too. So the guy's been probably celebrating all All-Star weekend, and obviously you want to win that game. It was a big loss for the Hawks that day, but I just thought it was dumb to get dogged on.
Yeah, I agree. It's just silly, the kind of expectations some of these superstars have. It's like, I guess I'm not going to relate it to LeBron James, but LeBron has one bad game and people are like, the king's fallen off, and then he comes back and drops 35, 9-9, and it's like, oh yeah, never mind. It's like there's 82 games in a season. Like they're bound to have one bad game, at least one bad game.
Well, and it's wild because like your average NBA player has like 15 good games a season, like 15 games where he scores like 20 and you're like, oh my God, this guy's going to be an all-star. And Trae Young's dropping 30 a night and he has one bad game where he plays, just not like himself, out of character. But but hopefully they get a win tonight. We'll be back tomorrow to discuss that. And hopefully the MLB will be back. We could have a huge show tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. And thank you guys for joining us.